Imagine boarding a flight, expecting nothing more than a journey across the skies, only to witness a shocking confrontation that would shake an entire airline. What happens when a young flight attendant refuses to stay silent against blatant disrespect? What would you do if you saw a passenger humiliated in front of everyone, while those in power turned away? And what if the woman who stood up in that moment carried a secret so powerful it could bring down the very system protecting corruption? This is not just another flight story. It's a battle for dignity, for truth, for justice at 35,000 feet. It's about courage in the face of silence, and the moment when one voice, just one, ignited an entire cabin of strangers to rise up together. But here's the question you'll be asking yourself all along when the truth is finally revealed. Will justice soar, or will it crash? Stay with us, because this story will change the way you look at every flight you ever take again. If you believe every voice deserves respect, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin the journey. The cabin was buzzing with the usual pre-flight energy. Luggage bins slammed shut, seatbelts clicked, passengers settled in with the nervous anticipation of a journey yet to begin. But amid the hum of quiet chatter and the scent of brewed coffee, something unexpected began to unfold. Amara Lewis stood at the back of the first-class cabin, adjusting the crisp navy blue uniform she had only recently grown accustomed to. Her name tag gleamed under the soft cabin lights. Though she looked calm, her chest tightened with the silent weight of a mission no one around her could possibly imagine. From the very start, Amara had sensed the tension in the crew. The senior attendants moved with the confidence of veterans who believed the cabin was their kingdom. At the helm was Richard Coleman, a tall man in his 50s with a permanent scowl etched across his face. His authority was unquestioned. His word, in this flying world, was law. Amara had expected hostility, but not this soon, and not this blatant. It began with a tray of steaming coffee. Richard held it loosely, too loosely, as he approached her during boarding. His eyes narrowed, his lips curling in a sneer. "You think you belong here, don't you?" he muttered under his breath, low enough that the passengers wouldn't hear but sharp enough to cut through her composure. Before Amara could respond, the tray tilted. The searing liquid spilled across her white blouse, burning her skin and soaking into the fabric. Gas rippled through the cabin. Several passengers looked up from their phones, their conversations freezing mid-sentence. The air stilled, heavy and electric. Amara inhaled sharply, the sting of hot coffee searing not just her skin, but her dignity. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. Yet what struck her most was Richard's expression, no hint of apology, only a cold satisfaction, as if he had proven a point. "This is first class," he said flatly, his voice louder now, projecting to those within earshot. "We hold ourselves to standards. Some people just don't meet them." The words hung in the air like a noose, a deliberate slight, a line drawn between who belonged and who didn't. And everyone in that cabin knew exactly what he meant. For a split second, Amara's instinct screamed at her to lash back, to let her anger fly like a storm. But deep within, a steadier voice emerged. It was her father's voice, firm and guiding. "Control the moment. Don't let them write your story." She steadied herself. Her trembling fingers set aside the soaked fabric of her blouse. Her dark eyes locked onto Richard's with a quiet fire that unsettled him more than any outburst could have. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A woman in row 2 whispered something to her husband. A young man in business attire raised his phone, as if debating whether to record. The silence grew thick, oppressive, waiting for Amara to either crumble or explode. Instead, she did something none of them expected. She straightened her spine. Her voice, calm yet resonant, broke the tension. "Mr. Coleman," she said evenly, "I don't think you realize who I am." Richard's smirk faltered. His eyes flicked with the faintest uncertainty. Amara took one deliberate step forward. The entire cabin seemed to lean in. Her words carried not just clarity, but authority. "My name," she continued, "is Amara Lewis. I am not just your junior attendant. I am the daughter of Daniel Lewis, the chief executive officer of Skyways International Airlines." Gas swept across the rows like a sudden gust of wind. Heads turned, mouths dropped. Even the most detached passengers were jolted upright. Richard's face drained of color, but Amara did not pause. "And this," she said, her voice sharpening as she addressed the room, "is not simply an accident with coffee. This is part of a deeper rot one that has poisoned this crew, this cabin, and this company for far too long. I am here because justice doesn't happen in boardrooms. It happens here, in the aisles where people believe no one is watching." The silence that followed was deafening. Not a murmur, not a shuffle. Even the engines outside seemed muted, as if the entire plane was holding its breath. Amara could feel her pulse pounding, but outwardly she remained poised, her presence filling the space. She looked around at the passengers, some shocked, some wide-eyed with admiration, some even tearing up. In their gaze, she saw the reflection of her choice, the courage to speak, the refusal to shrink. Richard tried to recover, clearing his throat. This is inappropriate." But his voice cracked. The authority he had wielded so effortlessly just moments before, now crumbling under the weight of truth. Amara didn't need to say more. Her statement was enough to set the cabin ablaze with questions. Passengers leaned across aisles, whispering, debating what they had just witnessed. The lines of power had shifted in an instant. Yet beneath the surface, Amara's thoughts swirled. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Her skin still burned from the coffee. And a quiet voice whispered doubts. Have I revealed myself too soon? Have I put the mission at risk? But another voice rose stronger, the voice of conviction. No. The truth was always meant to rise, and this is only the beginning. As the captain's announcement for takeoff crackled through the speakers, Amara held her ground, her uniform still damp, her spirit unshaken. This flight, she knew, would change everything. Daniel Lewis sat alone in his office, the city of Atlanta glittering through the glass walls behind him. The skyline stretched out like a field of ambitions. But tonight he wasn't admiring it. He leaned back in his leather chair, shoulders heavy, eyes fixed on the folder spread open across his desk. Inside were reports, customer complaints, and transcripts of incidents that should never have happened aboard his airline. The words pierced him. Words like ignored, humiliated, singled out. Passengers describing how they felt lesser, invisible, treated as if their money, their dignity, carried no weight. And time after time, the stories carried one common thread. They weren't about poor service or late meals. They were about race. Daniel rubbed his temples, trying to steady the storm in his mind. He had fought too hard to be here. He knew what it was to be underestimated, to walk into boardrooms where people doubted he belonged. He had survived the slights, the whispers, the glares that spoke louder than words. And now, after years of climbing, leading, proving, he was here, CEO of Skyways International Airlines. Yet somehow, the very injustice he had sworn to rise above still stained his company from within. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Marcus Hale, his most trusted advisor, stepped inside carrying a second copy of the report. Marcus, a tall man with calm eyes, closed the door gently behind him. "You've read them," Daniel said without looking up. "Yes," Marcus replied, setting the papers on the desk. "And I know that look on your face. You're already thinking 3 moves ahead. Daniel exhaled slowly. 3 moves, Marcus. This isn't a chess match. These are people, paying customers, human beings. And if these reports are true, and I believe they are, then we have a sickness spreading through our crews. Marcus leaned forward, his tone careful. We could order more training sessions, diversity workshops, a new PR campaign. Daniel's eyes lifted sharply. Band-Aids, he said flatly. You think a half-day workshop will fix this? These complaints aren't about ignorance. They're about attitudes that have calcified into culture. A culture that tells some passengers they don't belong. The silence between them was weighted. Marcus knew Daniel well enough not to argue. He could see the fire flickering behind his friend's calm demeanor. But Daniel's expression softened, his gaze drifting toward the framed photograph on his desk. It was a family picture, taken years ago, of him with his daughter Amara on a beach vacation. She was 12 then, wearing oversized sunglasses, laughing so freely that the memory almost hurt to revisit. She doesn't know, Daniel said quietly. She doesn't know how much of this I've shielded her from. And maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe she needed to see it sooner. Marcus tilted his head. You're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Daniel closed the folder, pressing his palm against its cover as though sealing the weight of the decision within. If I send another committee, another inspection team, the crew will cover their tracks. They'll smile for the cameras, check the boxes, and go right back to their poison once the spotlight fades. Marcus's voice lowered. Then what are you suggesting? Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady, deliberate. I need eyes inside. Someone who can see the truth, not just what they show when they're being watched. Marcus blinked. You mean undercover? Yes. Daniel's jaw tightened. I need someone I trust. Someone they would never suspect. The words hung in the air. Marcus's brows furrowed as realization dawned. He hesitated, searching for a way to dissuade him, but the steel in Daniel's gaze made it clear the decision was already forming. You can't mean Amara, Marcus finally said, shaking his head. She's brilliant. Yes, but she's not trained for this. She has a career in marketing. She's never served a meal at 30,000 feet. Never dealt with the chaos of a cabin. Daniel's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. And that's exactly why they'll underestimate her. They'll treat her the way they treat others they deem unworthy. She'll see their real faces. Daniel, think about what you're asking. This isn't a simulation. These are people who know how to cover their tracks. If they sense something's off, if they catch on. Marcus trailed off, his concern deepening. She's your daughter. For the first time. Daniel allowed the weight of that truth to press into his chest. The thought of Amara stepping into the wolf's den twisted his insides. His instinct was to protect her, to shelter her from every sharp edge the world could offer. Yet he also knew something else. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a woman with her own fire, her own resilience. He had seen it in her eyes. The same eyes that stared back at him from the mirror each morning. Marcus, Daniel said softly, I built this company for her future. For the day she could walk these halls without questioning whether she belonged. But if she's to inherit not just my title, but my fight, she needs to see what we're up against. She needs to live it, breathe it, feel it. Marcus's shoulders sank. He knew arguing further would be futile. Daniel's resolve was like bedrock. Once set, it could not be moved. You'll have to convince her, Marcus murmured, and I don't envy you for that conversation. Daniel chuckled dryly, though the sound carried no humor. No, neither do I. For the next several minutes, silence filled the office. The weight of the city lights pressed against the glass as both men sat with their thoughts. Daniel imagined the road ahead, the lies, the masks, the bruises his daughter might endure. He thought of the nights she might call him, exhausted, questioning why she had ever agreed. He thought of her strength, yes, but also her vulnerability, the fragility he had guarded so fiercely. And then he thought of the passengers. The elderly man who had been asked to move from first class because of his skin. The young woman who had been denied wine, while others were offered it freely. The child who had asked her mother why the attendant wouldn't smile at them, his fist clenched. This wasn't just about his daughter. This was about every person who dared to board an airplane with hope and left with humiliation instead. At last, Daniel rose from his chair. He placed the folder neatly back into his desk drawer and locked it. Tomorrow, he decided, he would speak to Amara. He would look into her eyes, tell her the truth, and offer her the choice. As he gazed once more at her photograph, he whispered under his breath, "Forgive me for the burden I'm about to place on you." And yet, in his heart, he believed she was ready, perhaps more ready than he had ever been. The restaurant was dimly lit, the kind of place Daniel Lewis reserved for conversations that mattered. He had chosen a quiet corner booth where the hum of other diners blended into a gentle background. Candles flickered against polished wood, casting soft light on the father and daughter seated across from each other. Amara stirred her iced tea absent-mindedly, sensing something unusual in her father's demeanor. He wasn't the kind of man to linger in silence, but tonight his eyes seemed heavier, more deliberate. "You're distracted," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "That's not like you." Daniel gave a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm thinking about something important, something that concerns you." "Actually," her brows lifted. "Me, yes." He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Amara, there are things happening inside this company, my company, that I can't ignore anymore. Things I need to deal with before they poison everything we've built." Amara sat straighter, her curiosity sharpening. She had grown up watching her father wrestle with impossible decisions, but there was a gravity in his tone tonight that made her pulse quicken. "Go on," she urged. Daniel reached into his jacket and slid a folder across the table. She hesitated before opening it, then scanned the pages inside. Complaint reports, passenger testimonies. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the words "denied service," "humiliated," "targeted." Her chest tightened. "Dad, this is awful. How is this still happening?" "That's the question," Daniel replied quietly. "On paper, our crews are well trained. We run diversity seminars. We celebrate inclusion. But reality doesn't match the brochures. In the air, when no one's watching, some of our attendants treat passengers differently. Worse, they treat them unequally." Amara set the folder down, her fingers trembling slightly. "So what are you going to do?" "Fire people bring in auditors." Daniel's gaze held hers. "No, that won't work. They'll cover their tracks, polish their smiles, and bury the truth. I need something stronger. I need someone I trust." The air seemed to thicken around them. Amara felt a strange unease creeping up her spine. "You mean—" and Daniel's eyes softened, but his voice was steady. "Yes. I want you to go undercover. Join the cabin crew. See the truth with your own eyes. Experience what the passengers experience. And bring it back to me." For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. She blinked, then laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. Me. A flight attendant, Dad. I work in marketing. I run campaigns. I don't serve drinks at 30,000 feet. This isn't about serving drinks," Daniel said firmly. "It's about serving justice." Her breath caught at his words. She leaned back, shaking her head, the thought almost absurd. Dad, I have no training, no experience. Do you realize how insane this sounds? You'd be putting me in the middle of something dangerous. If these people are really as bad as you say, what happens if they find out who I am? That's why you'd go in as someone else, he explained. A new recruit. No one would suspect. You'd be anonymous, invisible. Amara's heart raced. She had faced challenges before leading presentations, negotiating with partners, even managing hostile boardroom debates, but this was something else entirely. This was stepping into a world she didn't know, with risks she couldn't measure. Why me? She asked finally, her voice quieter. Why not send Marcus? Or hire an outside investigator? Daniel's expression softened with something between love and pain. Because I can't trust anyone else. Everyone in this company has something to lose, some angle to protect. Except you. You carry my name, my legacy, but you also carry your own fire. You'll see things others overlook, and you won't flinch when the truth stares you in the face. She swallowed hard, feeling her throat tighten. For a moment she saw herself through his eyes, capable, resilient, stronger than she believed. But then reality crashed back. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Daniel reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. His touch was warm, steady, anchoring her against the storm in her chest. I won't lie to you, Amara. It will be difficult. You'll be tested in ways you've never imagined. You'll see sides of people that will disgust you. You might even question yourself. But I believe you can do it. I believe you were meant to do it. Her mind spun. She imagined herself in uniform, walking down narrow aisles, facing strangers who judged her at a glance. She imagined the sting of their words, the coldness of their eyes. She imagined the loneliness of carrying a secret she couldn't share. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred. A spark of anger, a hunger for justice. She remembered times in her own life when she had been overlooked, dismissed, treated as though she didn't belong. She had buried those memories deep, but they flickered now, fueling a fire that whispered, "This is your chance to change it." Amara's fork clattered against her plate as she pushed it aside. She pressed her palms together, staring at her father. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel's eyes locked on hers, unwavering. "Then you'll still have tried, and that will be more than anyone else dared to do." Silence stretched between them. The restaurant noise faded into a blur of clinking glasses and hushed laughter. In that bubble of stillness, Amara felt the weight of her choice pressing down. Finally, with a breath that trembled but did not break, she extended her hand across the table. Her father grasped it firmly, their fingers interlacing like the binding of a pact. "All right," she said softly. "I'll do it." Daniel's grip tightened, his eyes glistening with both pride and fear. "You don't know how much this means to me." "No," she replied, her voice steadier now. "I don't. But I'm going to find out." As they sat in the glow of candlelight, Amara felt the world shift around her. She was no longer just a daughter, or an executive, or a bystander to injustice. She was stepping into a storm with no guarantee of shelter. And for the first time, she realized the storm was exactly where she needed to be. The training center in Dallas buzzed with the energy of new recruits. Rolling suitcases clicked across the polished floors. Voices overlapped in nervous chatter, and crisp uniforms hung stiffly on bodies not yet molded by long hours in the air. To Amara, it felt like stepping into an entirely new world, a stage where she had no lines prepared and no script to guide her. The building itself smelled faintly of jet fuel and fresh paint. Posters of smiling flight attendants lined the walls. each one frozen in corporate perfection, promising safety and hospitality. But Amara knew the glossy pictures were only half the truth. She was here to uncover the other half. Her heart raced as she adjusted the navy blazer of her uniform. This wasn't her father's world of boardrooms and strategy sessions. This was where the real faces of the airline lived, where habits were formed, where culture took root. A whistle blew, sharp and commanding. A woman in her 40s stepped forward, her posture straight, her hair pulled into a perfect bun. "Good morning, recruits," she announced. "My name is Instructor Collins. Over the next 6 weeks, you will learn everything you need to know about representing Skyways International Airlines. You will be tested physically, mentally, and emotionally. Not everyone here will make it, but those who do will carry the pride of this uniform." Amara felt her throat tighten. She wasn't here to wear the uniform with pride. She was here to wear it as armor. She glanced around at the faces beside her. Some recruits looked eager, their smiles too wide, their nerves barely contained. Others appeared cautious, calculating the cost of failure before the first lesson even began. And then there was Sophia Bennett. Sophia stood 2 people away, a tall woman with curly auburn hair and a warmth that seemed to radiate from her. When she caught Amara's eye, she gave a small nod and an encouraging smile. It was a simple gesture, but to Amara, it felt like a lifeline tossed into uncertain waters. The morning passed in a blur of drills and lectures, safety procedures, emergency protocols, the proper angle to pour wine into a glass without spilling. Each task was delivered with exacting detail, each mistake corrected with clinical precision. Amara struggled more than she expected. Her hands trembled as she practiced fastening the demo life vest. She dropped the oxygen mask twice before finally securing it correctly. Each fumble felt like a spotlight exposing her. She could almost hear Richard Coleman's voice in her head, sneering, telling her she didn't belong. By lunchtime, her confidence was unraveling. She sat at a cafeteria table staring at her untouched sandwich, the hum of conversation around her fading into static. "What am I doing here?" she thought. "I'm not cut out for this. I'm pretending. And if I can't even secure a life vest without fumbling, how am I supposed to face the crew on a real flight rough morning?" The voice pulled her back. Sophia slid into the seat across from her. Setting down a tray piled with salad and fruit, she leaned forward, resting her chin in her hand. "I saw you struggling with the vest," Sophia said gently. "Don't worry. Everyone does it first. It's not as easy as it looks." Amara forced a small smile. "You didn't struggle." Sophia shrugged. "I practiced last night. My little sister made me demo the whole thing for her stuffed animals." She grinned. "The teddy bear almost didn't survive the crash, but I think he pulled through." The joke cracked something inside Amara, loosening the knot in her chest. She laughed, the sound surprising her with its suddenness. "See," Sophia said, smiling wider. "You're not alone. We're all learning. Some of us just fake it better than others." For the first time since arriving, Amara felt the heaviness lift. Maybe, she thought, she could survive this after all. The following days blurred into a rhythm. Wake up early, drill emergency evacuations, study safety manuals, memorize seat configurations. Amara's body ached. Her mind swirled with acronyms and procedures. But little by little, she improved. The trembling of her hands lessened. The oxygen mask stayed in place. The vest buckled smoothly. Still, the weight of her secret never left her. At night, lying in the dormitory bed surrounded by the snores and whispers of other recruits, she stared at the ceiling and replayed her father's words. "This isn't about serving drinks. It's about serving justice." But justice felt far away here. Instead, She felt like a fraud among people who were truly chasing a dream. She wondered what Sophia would say if she knew the truth. Would she feel betrayed, or would she understand one evening, after a particularly grueling day of evacuation drills? Sophia and Amara walked together through the training center courtyard. The Texas air was warm, scented with blooming magnolia trees. "You did great today," Sophia said. "Your timing on the slide evacuation was perfect." "Thanks," Amara replied, though doubt lingered in her voice. Sophia glanced at her. "You don't give yourself enough credit. You're strong. Amara, you don't let fear show. Even when I can tell you're terrified, that's rare." The words hit Amara deeper than Sophia could know. For a moment, she wanted to spill everything the truth about her father, about her mission, about the reasons she was really here. But she held back. Trust was precious, and she couldn't risk breaking it too soon. Instead, she smiled faintly. "Maybe I just hide it well." As the weeks passed, Amara began to notice subtle cracks in the culture of the trainees. Most were kind, eager to support one another, but a few carried an edge. They rolled their eyes when paired with recruits who didn't look like them. They whispered jokes just loud enough to sting. It was small, insidious, but unmistakable. The kind of behavior her father had warned her about. One afternoon, during a group exercise, a male trainee deliberately ignored Grace Williams, a young black recruit, when assigning roles. He handed out tasks to everyone else, then shrugged at Grace as if she didn't matter. Amara's chest burned. She opened her mouth, ready to intervene. But before she could, Sophia stepped in. "Grace, why don't you lead the drill? You've got the clearest voice here." The shift in the group was immediate. Grace straightened, her eyes shining with gratitude. The others had no choice but to follow her lead. Amara watched, her admiration for Sophia deepening. Sophia wasn't just kind. She was courageous. She challenged wrongs in small, quiet ways that carried more power than shouting ever could. Later that night, Amara replayed the moment in her mind. She felt both inspired and ashamed. Inspired by Sophia's courage. Ashamed that she herself had hesitated. She promised silently that next time she wouldn't stay quiet. By the final week of training, Amara had transformed. She could recite safety procedures in her sleep. She could handle turbulence simulations without flinching. Her instructors noted her growth, though some remained skeptical, still seeing her as the quiet recruit who had stumbled on day one. On graduation day, she stood in line with her classmates, her uniform fitting her now like a second skin. Instructor Collins pinned the silver wings to her blazer with a rare smile. "Congratulations! You're officially flight attendants of Skyways International." As applause filled the hall, Amara touched the wings at her chest. They gleamed under the lights, small but symbolic. To the others, they represented dreams fulfilled. To her, they represented a mission, just beginning. She glanced at Sophia, who gave her a thumbs up and mouthed, "We did it." Amara smiled, but deep down, her heart whispered the truth. The real test was still waiting 30,000 feet above the ground. The morning sun painted the Atlanta airport in gold. Streaks of light bouncing off steel and glass as travelers hurried through the terminals. For most passengers, today was just another journey. For Amara Lewis, it was the beginning of her mission, her first official flight as a Skyways International flight attendant. She stood with the rest of the crew near the gate, the polished Navy uniform fitting like a disguise she still hadn't grown into. Her silver wings gleamed on her chest, yet her heart pounded as though they were made of lead. Around her, seasoned attendants exchanged easy banter, their laughter carrying the ease of people who had done this 1,000 times. Then she saw him, Richard Coleman. He approached with the slow confidence of someone who knew the ground shifted to accommodate him. His salt and pepper hair was combed with meticulous precision, his uniform immaculate. His smile was charming, but his eyes carried an unmistakable sharpness, like glass that could cut if handled carelessly. "New faces," he announced, scanning the recruits before his gaze settled on Amara. His smirk widened. "Ah, fresh blood. Let me guess you're eager, idealistic, and ready to make the skies friendlier." The group chuckled politely. Amara forced a smile, willing her heartbeat to steady. "Yeah, sir," she replied, her voice even. Richard leaned closer, his tone dropping just enough for her to hear. "Don't call me sir. Call me Richard. We're family here." He winked, but something about the way his eyes lingered made her skin prickle. As boarding time neared, the crew huddled for briefing. Richard rattled off assignments with clipped authority, distributing tasks as though dealing cards. Amara was placed in the rear galley with Sophia. Relief washed over her at the familiar face. "Stick with me," Sophia whispered as they prepared the carts. "First flights are chaos, but you'll find your rhythm." Amara nodded, grateful for the anchor. The passengers streamed in, lugging suitcases, adjusting neck pillows, juggling phones and coffee cups. Amara greeted them with the brightest smile she could muster, though her nerves fluttered like trapped birds. Most passengers responded kindly. A few ignored her entirely. One man muttered something under his breath when she asked him to stow his bag, his tone dripping disdain, though his words were indistinct. She swallowed it, forcing her voice calm. "Thank you, sir." But it wasn't long before she saw her first fracture. Midway through boarding, a woman in her 30s entered the cabin. Grace Williams, Amara's fellow trainee, now assigned to another crew, but coincidentally on the same flight today. Grace walked with quiet dignity, her uniform as crisp as anyone else's. But when Richard saw her, his expression shifted, subtle but clear. His eyes narrowed, his smile thinning. "Williams," he said, almost sighing the name. "Back galley. Stay out of the aisle until we need you." Grace blinked, surprised. "Sir, I was assigned to first class for today's service." Richard's grin returned, but it was sharp now, not warm, not anymore. "We'll need consistency up front." His gaze flicked toward a blonde attendant standing nearby. "Megan, you'll take first class instead." The decision hung heavy in the air. Grace's posture stiffened, but she nodded. "Yes, Richard." Amara's stomach twisted. She caught the quick glance Sophia gave her, one of recognition, frustration, but also warning. "Not yet." Sophia's eyes seemed to say, "Don't blow your cover on day one." Still, the injustice burned. Grace had worked hard, earned her assignment, and yet, with one dismissive sentence, it was stripped away. Once airborne, the rhythm of service began. The clink of ice against plastic cups, the shuffle of carts, the hum of engines overhead. Amara focused on tasks pour, smile, repeat. But the image of Grace being sidelined gnawed at her. In the middle of service, a moment crystallized into something she couldn't ignore. A black passenger, Dr. Elijah Moore, sat in seat 14C. He was well dressed, reading medical notes on a tablet, his demeanor calm and professional. When Amara approached, he looked up with a polite smile. "Coffee, please. Black. No sugar." She nodded. "Of course." But before she could pour, Richard appeared at her side. He took the pot from her hand smoothly, his smile aimed not at Dr. Moore, but at the passenger across the aisle, a white businessman in a suit. "Whiskey, on the house," Richard said, pouring generously. The man chuckled, clearly flattered. "Doctor?" Moore raised his hand slightly. "Excuse me. I asked for coffee." Richard's eyes flicked to him, the warmth vanishing. "We'll get to you. Be patient." Amara froze. The tone was sharp, dismissive, as though Dr. Moore's request carried no weight. Sophia, nearby, stiffened but said nothing. Grace, stationed in the back, caught the exchange too, her eyes darkening. Amara's pulse thundered. She wanted to shout, to challenge, to strip away Richard's polished facade, but she forced her voice calm. "I can handle this," she said softly, reclaiming the pot. She poured the coffee and set it before Dr. Moore, meeting his eyes with quiet apology. He gave her a nod, small but grateful, though the shadow of humiliation lingered in his posture. As service continued, Richard's patterns became clearer. He lavished attention on certain passengers while brushing others aside. His charm flowed effortlessly toward those he deemed worthy, while his disdain for others leaked through subtle jabs, delayed service, curt words. Each slight was small, deniable, but together they painted a chilling picture, later, in the galley. Amara's hands shook as she stacked trays. "Did you see that she whispered to Sophia?" Sophia's jaw tightened. "I saw it, and so did Grace. But if you call him out now, he'll bury you. He's been here for decades. He knows how to twist stories, how to make it look like you're the problem. So we just let him." Amara's voice cracked, frustration boiling. "For now," Sophia said firmly. "For now. You observe. You remember. You gather proof. That's how you win." Amara swallowed hard. It went against every instinct in her body. But she knew Sophia was right. Her mission wasn't about one confrontation. It was about uncovering the truth so deeply, so irrefutably, that it couldn't be denied. Hours later, as the plane descended toward Chicago, Amara looked out the window at the city lights glittering like constellations below. To the passengers, the flight had been routine, unremarkable. But to her, it had been a revelation. Her father was right. The sickness was real. It lived in the smiles that cut like knives, in the orders that stripped dignity, in the fractures that spread quietly but relentlessly. As the wheels touched down, Amara made herself a promise. She would not let this go unseen. She would not let Richard Coleman's version of the skies remain unchallenged. The first battle had been fought in silence. The next, she knew, would not be. The flight back to Atlanta was quieter, at least on the surface. Passengers settled into their routines, headphones on, eyes glued to glowing screens. The steady hum of engines lulling the cabin into a rhythm of half-sleep. But for Amara Lewis, silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the quiet before a storm. She moved down the aisle with her service cart, every step practiced now, but her mind remained unsettled. Richard Coleman's behavior from the last flight replayed in her head like a tape she couldn't shut off. The look in Dr. Moore's eyes lingered, that subtle ache of dignity stolen in front of strangers, and Grace, forced to the back galley, her competence diminished by a single dismissive order. Amara smiled politely as a passenger asked for a blanket, but her jaw tightened as she handed it over. She wasn't angry at the passenger. She was angry at the system that allowed men like Richard to walk unchecked, their casual cruelty hidden behind charming smiles and seniority pins. Later in the galley, she leaned against the counter, stealing a moment to breathe. Sophia joined her, carrying an empty tray. "You're quiet," Sophia observed, wiping her hands on a towel. "I'm just thinking," Amara said, though her voice carried more weight than she intended. About Richard, Sophia's tone was low, careful. Amara hesitated, then nodded. "How does he get away with it? People see it. People feel it. Why doesn't anyone say anything?" Sophia sighed. Because he knows how to play the game. If a passenger complains, he turns it around, says they were difficult, unreasonable. If a crew member speaks up, he calls them inexperienced, emotional. Management buys it because he's been here forever. He's their golden boy. That's not golden, Amara said bitterly. That's rot. Sophia studied her, her eyes thoughtful. You've got fire. Amara, I admire it. But fire can burn you too, if you don't learn when to hold it. Amara swallowed, knowing Sophia was right. Yet the fire inside her didn't dim. If anything, it spread wider, feeding on every injustice she witnessed. As the flight wore on, another fracture revealed itself. Grace approached Richard at the front galley, her posture respectful but firm. Richard, a passenger asked me a question about connecting flights. I wasn't sure about the policy. Could you clarify Richard didn't look up from his tablet? If you don't know, tell them to ask someone else. Grace blinked. But they specifically asked me. Richard snapped his head up, his smile gone. Then maybe they asked the wrong person. The word struck like a slap. Grace's face flushed, but she bit back her reply and turned away. Amara, standing nearby, felt her blood surge. She wanted to step forward, to call him out, to tell him he was tearing people down instead of building them up. But she caught Sophia's warning glance. Not yet. Instead, Amara approached Grace later in the crew rest area. You did nothing wrong, she whispered. He was out of line. Grace exhaled, her shoulders slumping. He always is. But if I fight him, I'm labeled difficult. If I stay quiet, I'm invisible. Either way, I lose. Her words cut deep. Amara knew that weight too well. The impossible choice between silence and resistance. She wanted to promise Grace that change was coming, but her secret mission chained her tongue. All she could say was, You're not invisible. Not to me. Grace's eyes softened. Thanks. That helps more than you know. When they landed in Atlanta, passengers disembarked, oblivious to the battles waged quietly among the crew. To them, it was just another flight. But to Amara, every second had been a lesson in how injustice survived not through dramatic explosions, but through small, constant cuts. Back at her apartment that night, exhaustion weighed heavy on her bones, but sleep refused to come. She lay staring at the ceiling, Richard's words echoing in her head. Then maybe they asked the wrong person. She thought of her father's folder of complaints, each line a story like Grace's, like Dr. Moore's. She thought of the people who had walked away from Skyways, defeated, unseen. She thought of herself, sitting across from her father at that candlelit table, promising she would do this. And then the doubt crept in. What if I can't change anything? What if I'm just one more witness who walks away? Her chest tightened. For the first time, the fire inside her flickered, threatened by the wind of despair. But then she remembered Sophia's words. You're strong, Amara. You don't let fear show, even when I can tell you're terrified. Slowly, she sat up, her fists clenching in the darkness. No. She couldn't let Richard's voice be louder than her own. She couldn't let Grace's resignation be the final word. She whispered into the stillness of her room, as though promising herself and the ghosts of every passenger in her father's folder. I won't be silent, not forever. The next morning, she returned to the training center for a refresher course before her next assignment. As she walked the halls lined with glossy posters of smiling crews, she felt the weight of their emptiness. Smiles meant nothing if they hid cruelty. In the cafeteria, she found Grace sitting alone, staring into her coffee. Amara slid into the seat across from her. You don't deserve what he said, Amara told her again, Firmer this time, and you don't deserve to be sidelined. You're good at this job. Better than most. Grace gave a small, tired smile. You're kind, but kindness doesn't change the system. Maybe not, Amara admitted, but it can change the people standing in it. Grace studied her, as though weighing her words. Then, for the first time, she smiled genuinely. Maybe you're right. That night, Amara wrote in a journal she had begun to keep. She recorded every slight, every cruel word, every pattern she saw. Not just facts, but feelings. The humiliation in Dr. Moore's eyes, the stiffness in Grace's posture, the way Richard's smile disappeared like a mask slipping. It wasn't just evidence. It was truth, captured raw before it could fade. And as she closed the notebook, she realized something important. This mission wasn't only about exposing Richard. It was about giving voice to the people who had been silenced for too long. For the first time, the fire inside her didn't feel like it was burning her alive. It felt like it was lighting her way forward. The morning of the flight to Denver carried a strange electricity, the kind that made the air hum even before the engines roared to life. Amara Lewis felt it in her chest as she pinned on her silver wings. She had flown enough routes now to find a rhythm, but today felt different, charged, unsettled. At the gate, Richard Coleman greeted the crew with his usual polished charm. Big flight today. Full house, he said, his grin stretching thin. His eye swept across the group and landed on Amara. Our rookie's still here. Haven't scared you off yet. Amara forced a polite smile. Not yet. Good, Richard replied. We need thick skin up there. Can't let every little complaint ruffle you. He clapped her on the shoulder. The gesture meant to be light, but landing heavy. As passengers boarded, Amara took her place near the mid-cabin aisle. She smiled, collected boarding passes, helped lift bags overhead. She had learned to mask her nerves beneath calm efficiency. But every time she caught Richard's gaze, she felt the reminder of why she was here. Halfway through boarding, Grace Williams entered with another flight crew, assigned to economy for this leg. She flashed Amara a quick smile, though it faltered when Richard's eyes narrowed at her. Amara noticed the way Grace's posture stiffened, bracing herself for whatever slight might come. The flight began smoothly enough. Passengers settled with magazines, headphones, and restless children. Drinks were served, trays collected. The hum of engines filled the spaces between small talk and quiet sighs. Then it happened. In row 10, Dr. Elijah Moore was seated again, pure coincidence, or maybe fate. He wore the same calm expression, his tablet balanced on the tray table. Beside him sat an elderly white woman struggling to reach her seatbelt. Amara approached quickly. Here, let me help, she said gently, guiding the buckle into place. The woman smiled gratefully. Thank you, dear. These fingers don't work like they used to. Amara returned her smile before moving down the aisle. But moments later, Richard arrived. Everything all right here? He asked, his tone laced with performance. The elderly woman nodded. This young lady helped me. Very kind. Richard chuckled. That's what we're here for. Then his eyes shifted to Dr. Moore, sharp as glass. Sir, your bag looks a little bulky under the seat. Could cause a hazard. You'll need to put it in the overhead. Dr. Moore looked down at the slim briefcase tucked neatly beneath his feet. It wasn't bulky. It was no larger than the purses and backpacks scattered under every other seat in the row. It fits within the required size. Dr. Moore said calmly. I made sure before boarding. Richard's smile thinned. Rules are rules. I'll need you to move it. Doctor. Moore exhaled slowly, clearly weighing his response. I travel often. I know the regulations. The bag is fine. Amara froze a few rows away, her pulse hammering. She could see what Richard was doing. She could feel the injustice sharpening like a blade. Passengers nearby began to shift, sensing the tension. The elderly woman frowned, glancing between Richard and Dr. Moore. Richard's voice hardened. "If you don't comply, sir, I'll have to escalate this." Amara's breath caught. Escalate. Over a perfectly fine briefcase. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Richard, the bag meets requirements. I checked earlier when assisting passengers. It's secured and not obstructing." The air went still. Richard turned his gaze on her, and for a heartbeat, the charm slipped completely. His eyes were cold steel. "Amara," he said softly, dangerously, "you're new. You don't correct me in front of passengers." Her stomach clenched, but she didn't back down. "I'm not correcting you. I'm clarifying for safety, and the bag is safe. Doctor." Moore's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his dignity intact despite the storm around him. Richard straightened slowly, forcing a smile back onto his face, as if pulling on a mask. "Very well. Since our rookie insists, the bag can stay. But remember, Amara chain of command matters." He walked away, but the chill of his warning lingered. Amara turned to Dr. Moore, her voice low. "I'm sorry. Doctor." Moore gave her a small nod, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Don't be. You did the right thing." The rest of the flight was thick with tension. Richard's smiles were too sharp, his instructions clipped. He avoided Amar except for curt orders, but his glances carried promises of retribution. Later, in the galley, Sophia leaned close. "You just painted a target on your back." "I couldn't let him humiliate that man again," Amar whispered. "I know," Sophia said, her voice soft but urgent. "And I'm proud of you. But Richard, he doesn't forget. Be careful." When the plane landed, the passengers left with little awareness of the storm that had brewed in the cabin. To them, it was just another flight. But for Amara, the line had been crossed. She had stepped out of silence. Back in the crew lounge, Richard cornered her. His smile was gone now, replaced by the raw edge of authority. "Let me make something clear," he said, his voice low, words sharp as nails. "You embarrassed me in front of passengers. Do it again, and you won't last a month here." Amara met his gaze, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "I'm not here to protect your pride. Richard, I'm here to protect passengers. For a moment." His expression cracked surprise, then anger, then something darker. He leaned in closer. "Watch yourself, rookie. The skies aren't friendly for everyone, especially for people who don't know their place." Amara held his stare, the weight of his words sinking deep. But instead of fear, something else filled her chest. Resolve. She knew now that Richard wouldn't change. The question was whether the airline would continue to shield him or whether she could finally pull the mask off in front of everyone. That night, she opened her journal again, her handwriting pressed harder against the page than usual, the ink darker, the letters sharp. Flight to Denver. Richard targeted Dr. Moore over a compliant bag. Attempted escalation. I intervened. Public confrontation. Witnesses, passengers. Sophia. Grace. His words afterward confirmed bias and intimidation. Evidence building. She closed the notebook with trembling hands. This wasn't just notes anymore. It was a weapon, and soon she would need to use it. The following week, Amara Lewis reported for another flight, but the air around her felt heavier than usual. Not the weather, not the passengers, but something else, an invisible weight that clung to her uniform. She knew what it was. Richard Coleman's threat. She had challenged him, and men like Richard didn't let challenges fade. They lingered, simmered, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. In the crew lounge, Richard sat with his legs crossed, coffee in hand, laughing with two other senior attendants. The laughter sounded sharp, like glass shattering. Amara felt his eyes slide toward her, then away again, as if she weren't even worth the effort of acknowledgement. That dismissal chilled her more than his threats. But there was someone new in the room, a man in a crisp suit with a clipboard, hair slicked back, posture perfect. His presence didn't carry Richard's charm, but it radiated power of another kind, the kind built in boardrooms and back offices. Peter Langston, Regional Operations Manager. Amara had heard of him, though she had never met him. He was said to be Richard's shield in management, someone who saw complaints not as alarms, but as inconveniences to be silenced. When briefing ended, Langston cleared his throat. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you that Skyways International prides itself on professionalism and consistency. Our passengers trust us not only to get them to their destinations, but to make them feel welcome in our care. I trust that all of you understand what that means. His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly intentionally on Amara. Richard smirked. The flight itself started uneventfully. Amara worked the back with Sophia, grateful for her steady presence, but mid-flight, Langston made his way through the cabin, observing, not like a passenger, not like crew, but like someone checking for cracks in the facade. He paused at row 14 where Dr. Moore sat again. Fate, or maybe the universe, kept throwing him into Amara's orbit. Dr. Moore was polite, reserved, as always. When Amara served him coffee, he thanked her warmly. But Langston's attention lingered. His gaze wasn't curious. It was calculating. Later, in the galley. Langston joined Richard, his voice low but audible enough for Amara to catch snippets. Bourdim had another incident last week, Langston asked. Richard's tone was smooth, casual, a rookie misunderstanding. She'll learn. Passengers notice, Langston replied. They won't if we manage it right, Richard said, sipping his coffee. Langston chuckled softly. That's what I like about you. Coleman. You know how to keep turbulence off the books. Amara's stomach nodded. She forced herself to keep moving, pretending to organize trays. But her ears sharpened like blades. When the flight landed, she lingered behind in the lounge, waiting until most of the crew had left. She saw Richard and Langston step into an office together, the door closing softly behind them. Grace appeared at her side, her face pale. You heard them too, didn't you? Amara nodded slowly. They don't care, Grace whispered. Not about fairness. Not about passengers. They care about appearances. As long as complaints don't pile too high, they'll protect each other. Amara's fire roared in her chest. She wanted to storm into that office, to demand answers, to lay her journal on the table and force them to look. But she knew what would happen. They'd smile, nod, and bury her words under rookie exaggeration. She clenched her fists until her nails bit her palms. Not yet. That night, she met Sophia and Grace for dinner at a small diner near the airport. The neon sign buzzed overhead as they slid into a booth, exhaustion painted across all their faces. Sophia broke the silence first. We can't fight this alone. Richard has Langston. Langston has the board. Complaints just vanish into their desk drawers. Grace stirred her tea absently. So what's the point if nothing changes? Maybe it's better to just survive. Keep your head down. Amara's chest tightened. That's what they want. For us to believe survival is enough. But every time Dr. Moore is treated like less, every time you're pushed aside, every time they rewrite reality, something is stolen. Not just dignity, hope. Sophia looked at her carefully. You sound like you have a plan. Amara hesitated, then pulled her small notebook from her bag. She placed it on the table, opening to pages filled with careful handwriting. I've been recording everything, every slight, every word, every pattern. This isn't just stories, it's evidence. Grace's eyes widened. You've been keeping track. Yes, Amara said firmly. And one day, when the time is right, this will matter. But I can't do it alone. The booth went silent. Sophia leaned back, exhaling. Grace looked torn, fear battling with hope in her eyes. Finally, Grace whispered, if you're willing to risk it, then maybe I should be too. Mara felt her heart steady. For the first time, she wasn't just a lone witness. She had allies. But as the weeks passed, Langston's presence grew heavier. He showed up at briefings more often, sat in first class during flights under the guise of quality checks, always with that same calm smile. Amara realized something chilling. Langston wasn't just protecting Richard, he was studying her. One evening, after a long flight, she was called into his office. The walls were lined with framed certificates, photos of Langston shaking hands with executives, awards polished to a shine. He gestured to a chair. Amara, right. His tone was pleasant, almost fatherly. Yes, sir. I've been hearing about you, Langston said, folding his hands on the desk. New, ambitious. That's good. We like fresh energy. But I've also heard you challenge procedures. Amara's pulse quickened. I believe in doing what's right for passengers. Langston smiled faintly. We all do. But remember, perception is everything in this business. A single word from the wrong mouth can spiral. We can't afford that. Her chest tightened. Are you telling me to ignore what I see I'm telling you? Langston said smoothly. That you need to decide if you want a career here, or if you want to burn out before you've even begun. The threat was soft, wrapped in politeness, but it landed like a hammer. Amara met his eyes, her voice steady though her heart raced. I didn't come here to burn out. I came here to fly, and to make sure everyone who boards our planes is treated with respect. Langston's smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes hardened. Then I hope your definition of respect matches ours. As Amara left the office, her knees trembled. She wanted to collapse, but instead, she clutched her notebook tighter. If she had doubted before, she didn't now. This wasn't just about Richard. It wasn't even just about Langston. This was systemic, protected. And unless she was careful, she would be the next casualty of their polished machine. But as she walked out into the night air, the roar of departing planes above her, she whispered to herself again, steady as a vow I won't be silenced. The Denver route came again, this time with tension so thick it felt like the air in the cabin had already thinned before takeoff. Amara Lewis adjusted her uniform in the crew lounge mirror, her reflection steady but her heart restless. She knew today wouldn't be ordinary. She could feel it in the marrow of her bones. Richard Coleman strutted into briefing with his usual smirk, greeting the crew as if he were the star of the show. Peter Langston wasn't present, but his shadow lingered in every word Richard spoke. We'll keep it professional today, Richard announced. No slip-ups, no unnecessary debates. I want this flight smooth as glass. His eyes cut briefly toward Amara before he continued. Passengers remember confidence, not chaos. Amara kept her expression neutral, though inside, she bristled. Confidence is not cruelty, and chaos doesn't come from honesty, it comes from lies. Boarding began. Passengers streamed in, their faces carrying stories of business, family visits, and long-awaited vacations. Amara smiled, assisted with bags, and guided them to seats. She carried herself calmly, but her notebook weighed heavy in her bag, like a silent companion urging her forward. In row 3, Grace was helping a family with children when Richard swooped in, his voice dripping with impatience. "Grace, you're holding up boarding. Step aside. I'll handle this." Grace froze, her cheeks flushed. The father frowned. She was doing fine, he muttered under his breath. But Richard ignored him, ushering the family along as if Grace's presence were an obstacle, not a help. Amara caught Grace's eye, her silent fury mirroring Grace's humiliation. She bit her tongue. Not yet. Takeoff was smooth, engines roaring the plane into the clouds. Service began as usual. But the storm was waiting. It came in row 7. A white male passenger in a business suit complained loudly that his seat wasn't reclining properly. Amara approached, offering a polite apology and suggesting alternatives. But the man waved her off. "Get me someone in charge." Before Amara could respond, Richard appeared, his tone sugary sweet. "Of course, sir. Let me assist." He crouched to inspect the seat, then stood with a theatrical sigh. Turning to Amara, he said loudly, "Why didn't you catch this before rookie mistake? This is why training matters." Amara's stomach twisted. Passengers were watching, their eyes curious, some sympathetic, others indifferent. Richard was crafting his stage, turning her into a prop in his performance of authority. She drew a steady breath. The seat mechanism worked during pre-flight checks. Sometimes issues arise in the air. I offered solutions. Richard's smile thinned. Excuses don't solve problems. The businessman smirked, enjoying the show. Heat rose in Amara's chest. She could feel her fire pushing against the cage of her composure. She forced herself calm, lowering her voice. Sir, I'll reseat you. We have an open spot in row 12. The businessman agreed, gathering his things. But Richard wasn't finished. He leaned closer to Amara, voice like a knife. Learn when to stay quiet. And then, as if fate orchestrated it, Dr. Elijah Moore's voice rose from row 10. Excuse me, attendant, could I have some water? Please. Amara started toward him, grateful for the chance to redirect. But Richard blocked her with an outstretched arm. I'll handle this, he said, striding to Dr. Moore's seat. He picked up a plastic cup, filled it halfway, and handed it over without a word. The gesture was dismissive, almost contemptuous. Dr. Moore accepted it calmly, but the tension rippled down the aisle. Passengers exchanged glances. A murmur spread. Amara's chest tightened. She couldn't stay silent. Not this time. She stepped forward, her voice clear, steady. Dr. Moore, let me bring you a fresh bottle of water. Richard turned sharply, his mask cracking. That's unnecessary. Amara met his gaze head-on. Respect is never unnecessary. The cabin went quiet. Every eye turned toward them. The businessman, the elderly woman, the restless children, all of them were witnesses now. Richard's jaw clenched. Enough. You're undermining me in front of passengers. I'm standing up for them, Amara said, her voice ringing in the charged silence. For him, for Grace, for every person you've dismissed. Gasps echoed. Grace's eyes widened. Sophia covered her mouth, and Dr. Moore sat straighter, his dignity affirmed by her words. Richard's face reddened. He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. One more word, and you're finished. Amara's hands trembled, but her voice did not. If protecting people means I'm finished, then so be it. The businessman from earlier muttered. She's right, earning nods from nearby passengers. The tide shifted. What had been silent observation became subtle solidarity. The elderly woman leaned forward, saying firmly, Young lady, you're doing a fine job. Richard faltered. For the first time, his authority cracked under the weight of public scrutiny. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. oblivious to the war raging in the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached cruising altitude. Please sit back and enjoy your flight." But no one was enjoying anything. The air was electric, heavy with the knowledge that something irreversible had just happened. Richard forced a smile, turning back to the passengers. "My apologies for the disruption. Let's continue service." He walked past Amara, his whisper hot against her ear. "You've just signed your own resignation." Her chest pounded, but she didn't regret it. Not for a second. For the rest of the flight. The atmosphere was tense, but Amara noticed something remarkable. Passengers treated her with a warmth that hadn't been there before. They smiled, thanked her sincerely, even offered quiet words of encouragement. Grace found her in the galley, her eyes shining. "I've never seen anyone stand up to him like that. You gave us all courage." Sophia nodded, her voice hushed. "You might have just started something bigger than any of us." When the plane touched down, applause broke out, not the usual scattered claps of relief, but genuine applause directed at Amara. The businessman started it. The elderly woman joined, and soon the cabin rang with it. Richard smiled tightly, pretending to bask in the praise, but his eyes burned with fury. Back in the crew lounge, he didn't speak to her. He didn't need to. His silence promised retaliation. Amara slipped away quickly, her notebook pressed close to her chest. Her entries tonight would not just be observations, they would be testimony of a breaking point, because she knew, deep down, this wasn't just her fight anymore. The passengers had seen. Grace had seen. Sophia had seen. And once truth is witnessed, it cannot be erased. That night, sitting at her desk, she wrote with unshakable clarity, "Flight to Denver. Public confrontation. Witnesses, passengers, crew. Authority challenged. Respect defended. This is no longer hidden. The skies themselves have spoken." She put down her pen, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. The battle was no longer behind closed doors. It was out in the open, where everyone could see. Amara Lewis barely slept after the confrontation. The memory of the passengers clapping echoed in her chest like a drumbeat, both empowering and terrifying. She had crossed a line, one that could never be erased. By morning, whispers had already spread across the crew network. Flight attendants traded texts and hushed calls. "Did you hear what happened on the Denver flight?" She stood up to Coleman in front of everyone. Passengers clapped. Some spoke with admiration, others with worry, and Amara knew the gossip traveled faster than any aircraft. By the time she arrived at the lounge for her next shift, eyes followed her. Some smiled in quiet solidarity. Others avoided her altogether, afraid of being caught in the blast radius of her defiance. Richard Coleman wasn't there. His absence was unsettling, like the calm before a storm. Instead, Peter Langston stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, his smile as polished as the shine on his shoes. "Good morning, team," he said smoothly. "Today we'll keep everything efficient, professional, and most importantly, united. Remember, our passengers see us as one. Internal conflicts should stay exactly that, internal." His gaze landed on Amara and lingered, deliberate and heavy. She kept her posture straight, but her stomach tightened. The flight briefing ended, and as attendants filed out, Langston called softly, "Miss Lewis, a moment." The room emptied quickly, leaving her alone with him. Langston closed his clipboard, setting it neatly on the counter. "You've caused quite a ripple," he said, his voice calm, almost pleasant. Amara folded her arms. "If you mean standing up for passengers, then yes, I did." Langston tilted his head, studying her. "Perception is everything in our business. What passengers saw on that flight was not confidence, but conflict. That applause you received, it wasn't celebration. It was chaos disguised as support. She met his gaze steadily. Respect isn't chaos. Langston's smile never faltered. Respect is defined by those in charge, not by rookies still learning their place. Her jaw tightened. There it is again. That word. Place. Langston leaned closer, his tone soft. You're ambitious, Amara. I can see that. And ambition can take you far if you know when to bend. But if you don't... His voice trailed off, the threat clear in the silence that followed. Amara didn't blink. I won't bend for injustice. The faintest shadow crossed his expression. Then you won't last here. She left the room, with her pulse hammering, but her resolve hardening. Each threat only confirmed that she was on the right path. That evening, she called Sophia and Grace to meet again at the little diner. The neon sign hummed overhead as they slid into the booth. This time, Amara didn't hesitate. She pulled out her notebook and set it on the table. I've documented everything, she said, flipping through pages filled with dates, times, quotes, and observations. Every insult, every dismissal, every passenger mistreated. If we keep adding to this, it's no longer just my word against theirs. It's undeniable. Sophia leaned forward, scanning the pages. This is powerful. Grace's hands trembled as she touched the edge of the notebook. But if Langston finds out, he already suspects, Amara interrupted. That's why we have to act carefully. We can't hand this to the company. They'll bury it. We need something bigger, public, unstoppable. Sophia glanced around the diner, lowering her voice. Like the media. Amara nodded. Or even my father. He doesn't know the full extent yet. If he did... Her voice faltered, the weight of her secret pressing down. He could change everything. Grace looked at her in shock. Your father, Amara, swallowed hard. She hadn't planned to reveal it yet, but trust had grown between them. Daniel Lewis. He's the CEO. Silence slammed down on the table. Sophia blinked. Grace's jaw dropped. You're his daughter, Sophia whispered. Yes, Amara admitted. I came undercover to see the truth with my own eyes. And now I have. But I can't go to him with half a story. I need the full picture, the rot, the cover-ups, the enablers, everything. Grace stared at her notebook, her expression torn between awe and fear. If this gets out, it will, Amara said firmly, but on our terms, not theirs. The next flight brought more fuel for her pages. She watched Richard treat Grace like an inconvenience, saw Langston board mid-route with his clipboard of observations, witnessed passengers of color subtly pushed to the back of boarding lines, or spoken to curtly while others received charm. Amara wrote it all down, every word, every detail. One evening after landing, as she scribbled in the break room, a voice broke through her focus. You're making quite the habit of writing. She looked up. Richard stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk playing at his lips. Amara shut the notebook instinctively. Just reflections. Richard chuckled, stepping closer. Funny. Looks more like a diary of complaints. Her chest tightened, but she kept her tone even. It's none of your business. Oh, but it is, Richard said, lowering his voice. Because if you're keeping a record, you're dangerous, and dangerous people don't last long here. He leaned down, his smile venomous. Be careful what you think you can prove. Without the right allies, words are just scribbles on paper. Amara held his gaze. Then maybe it's time those scribbles became voices. Richard's smirk faltered, just for a moment. Then he straightened, his mask sliding back on. We'll see how long you last, When he left. Amara's hands trembled as she clutched her notebook. She knew now the time was running out. Richard suspected her. Langston was watching. The walls were closing in. That night, she called Marcus Hale, her father's trusted advisor. "Marcus, it's worse than we thought," she said, her voice breaking. "The discrimination isn't just Richard. It's systemic. Langston covers it up. Complaints vanish. And now they know I'm watching." Marcus's voice was calm but urgent. "Amara, you need to decide. Do you expose this now with what you have, or do you keep digging at the risk of being silenced?" Amara closed her eyes, her chest tight. Images flooded her mind. Grace's humiliation. Dr. Moore's quiet dignity. Passengers applauding. Langston's threats. Her answer was clear. "I keep digging, but soon. Marcus, very soon." She hung up, her notebook open on the desk before her. The pages no longer looked like words. They looked like weapons. Weapons she would wield not in anger, but in truth. The flight assignment arrived in Amara Lewis's inbox late at night. New York to Los Angeles. Full passenger load. Richard Coleman as lead attendant. She stared at the glowing screen in her apartment, her notebook open beside her. Pages filled with dates, quotes, and stories stretched like a lifeline. This flight felt different, heavier, like the last piece of a long puzzle clicking into place. When morning came, the crew lounge buzzed with chatter. Sophia caught Amara's eye, her look firm and steady. Grace sat nearby, nervous but present. Then Richard arrived, his charm polished, his swagger intact. He greeted the room as though nothing had ever happened, but his eyes flicked to Amara with a spark of warning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "let's give our passengers a flawless experience. Remember, professionalism above all." Amara said nothing. She fastened her uniform jacket, her heart steady but her mind racing. The boarding process was chaotic from the start. A family with small children needed help. An elderly couple had trouble with their carry-ons. Grace assisted patiently, but Richard swooped in, barking orders instead of helping. "We don't have all day. People," he said loudly, earning irritated stares from passengers. Amara stepped forward. "Take your time," she told the couple gently, helping them settle. The woman squeezed her hand, whispering, "Thank you, dear." Richard's jaw flexed. He said nothing, but his glare promised a storm. Once airborne, the cabin hummed with the usual rhythm drink carts rolling, laughter mingling with the drone of engines, but beneath it all, tension coiled tight. It snapped in row 9. Dr. Elijah Moore was on board again. Fate, or something greater, had placed him on this final flight. He pressed the call button politely, asking for a blanket. Amara started toward him, but Richard blocked her path. "I'll take care of it." He walked to Dr. Moore's seat, his tone sharp. "We're limited on blankets. You'll have to manage without." A murmur spread among nearby passengers. The dismissal was blatant, unnecessary. Amara felt fire rise in her chest. She moved past Richard, retrieving a blanket from the overhead. She knelt beside Dr. Moore, her voice gentle. "Here you are. Sir, I'm sorry for the delay." Dr. Moore's eyes softened with gratitude. "Thank you." Richard's voice cut like a whip. "Lewis, step aside. That was unnecessary." Amara rose slowly, her notebook burning in her bag. She met his glare and, for the first time, didn't lower her voice. "It's not unnecessary to treat people with dignity." Passengers turned, their attention drawn like iron filings to a magnet. Richard's smile cracked. "You're undermining me again." "I'm correcting you," Amara replied, her voice clear, calm, but edged with steel. The cabin went silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting. A passenger in business class leaned into the aisle. "She's right. We all saw what you did." Another voice joined. "She's just doing her job better than you are." Whispers rippled, passengers nodding, murmuring agreement. Richard flushed red. His control, his carefully curated authority, was slipping. Suddenly, the curtain to first class rustled. Peter Langston stepped into the aisle, clipboard in hand, his expression calm but his presence heavy. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his tone smooth but edged with warning. Richard exhaled sharply, seizing the lifeline. "She's insubordinate, undermining authority in front of passengers. This is exactly the chaos I've been warning about." Langston turned his gaze to Amara. "Is that true?" Amara's pulse thundered. She felt Grace and Sophia's eyes on her, waiting. "Doctor." Moore sat quietly, his dignity intact, but his presence spoke louder than words. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook. Slowly, deliberately. She held it up for everyone to see. "No," she said, her voice unwavering. "What's true is this." She flipped it open, pages fluttering like wings. Weeks of documented mistreatment. Patterns of passengers ignored, humiliated, dismissed. Complaints buried, crew silenced. I've written it all down. Every word, every date, every flight. Gas spread through the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, riveted. Langston's smile froze. "You don't know what you're implying. Miss Lewis." Amara stepped into the aisle, her voice stronger with each word. "I know exactly what I'm saying. You cover for him. You bury complaints. You protect abuse because it keeps your image clean. But image doesn't matter when truth comes to light." Her words rang out, clear and sharp. Passengers murmured louder, some pulling out phones, recording. Richard lunged forward, his composure unraveling. "You don't get to accuse us. You're nothing but a rookie." But his words drowned beneath the swell of voices. "She's telling the truth," someone shouted from row 14. "I saw how you treated that man." Another added, "Unacceptable." The cabin erupted not in chaos, but in solidarity. Passengers raised their voices, demanding answers, backing Amara. Langston raised his hands, trying to quiet the storm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, remain calm." But calm was gone. The passengers had seen too much, heard too much. Amara lifted the notebook higher. "This ends today." Richard sneered. "And what do you think happens now? You think the company will listen to you. You think anyone will care about your scribbles." Amara's chest burned, but she stood tall. "They'll care because it's no longer just me. It's them." She gestured to the passengers, their phones raised, their voices united. The witnesses, the ones you can't silence. Langston's calm facade cracked, his jaw tightening as realization dawned. This was no longer containable. "Doctor." Moore rose slowly from his seat, his voice, steady and resonant, carried through the cabin. "What she says is true. I've been mistreated on multiple flights, dismissed, disrespected. And every time, I saw attendants like her trying to do what was right, shut down by men like you." The weight of his testimony landed like thunder. Langston opened his mouth, but no words came. Richard's face drained of color. Amara's hands trembled as she closed the notebook. She looked at Grace, who nodded firmly, then at Sophia, whose eyes shone with pride. The tide had turned. The flight continued, but nothing felt normal. Passengers whispered, recording, waiting. Richard retreated to the galley, silent and fuming. Langston sat stiff in first class, his clipboard untouched. Amara moved through the cabin, offering drinks, calming children, smiling gently at passengers who met her eyes with warmth and respect. For the first time, She felt seen not just as an attendant, but as a voice. When the plane touched down in Los Angeles, applause broke out again, louder this time, swelling through the cabin. It wasn't just relief at landing, it was recognition. Amara stood at the front as passengers disembarked, thanking each one. Many paused, pressing her hand, whispering words of encouragement. You did the right thing. Don't let them silence you. Keep fighting. By the time the last passenger left, Richard was gone. Langston too. Only Grace, Sophia, and Amara remained in the quiet cabin. Grace's voice trembled. You just declared war. Amara looked at her notebook, then at the empty seats that had borne witness. No, I just declared truth. And for the first time since this journey began, she felt ready for the storm that was coming. The terminal at Los Angeles buzzed with its usual chaos, families reuniting, business travelers hurrying, announcements echoing overhead. But for Amara Lewis, every sound felt distant, muted, like the world had shifted just slightly out of rhythm. She walked through the jet bridge with Grace and Sophia at her side, her notebook clutched tightly. The weight of it was heavier than ever, not because of the paper, but because of what it now represented. The passengers' voices, Dr. Moore's testimony, the recordings, the truth. Richard Coleman stormed ahead, shoulders stiff, phone pressed to his ear. His words were sharp, whispered, panicked. Peter Langston followed behind him, calm on the surface but his jaw rigid. Amara slowed her steps, letting them move ahead. She knew this wasn't over. Not yet. In the waiting area beyond security, Marcus Hale stood tall in his charcoal suit, eyes scanning the crowd. When he saw her, he approached quickly. You've stirred the hornet's nest, he said in a low voice, though his tone carried a trace of admiration. I didn't just stir it, Amara replied softly. I broke it open. Marcus glanced at the notebook in her hands. Are you ready for what comes next? Before she could answer, a voice carried across the terminal. Deep, commanding, familiar. Amara. Her breath caught. Daniel Lewis, her father, strode toward her. The CEO. The man who had built the airline empire now walked with a presence that turned heads even in a crowded airport. Passengers from the flight recognized him instantly, whispers rippling through the space. That's Daniel Lewis, the CEO himself. Richard froze mid-step, color draining from his face. Langston stopped short, his mask of calm faltering. Amara's heart pounded as her father reached her. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time in weeks, she let the walls fall. She extended the notebook with trembling hands. Read it, she whispered. All of it. Daniel took the notebook carefully, as if it were fragile glass. He flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable at first. Then his jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. With each line, each entry, the weight of systemic cruelty pressed heavier. Passengers who had gathered nearby watched silently. Some held up their phones, recording. The truth was no longer confined to the pages, it was spilling into the world. Finally, Daniel closed the notebook, his hand lingering on the worn cover. He turned slowly to Richard and Langston, his voice a controlled storm. Is this true? Richard stammered, his swagger gone. Sir, she's exaggerating passengers, misunderstands situations, exaggerating. Daniel's voice cut like a blade. I've read dates, names, incidents, witnesses. Do you deny this passenger? He gestured toward Dr. Moore, who had stepped forward quietly, his presence commanding without effort. Doctor, Moore shook his head. I do not deny. I confirm. Every word she wrote. I have lived. Gasps spread through the watching crowd. Richard's mouth opened and closed. But no defense came. Daniel turned to Langston. "And you?" The reports she references were. They buried. Langston's composure cracked at last. "Sir, the goal was to protect the airline's image." "The airline's image?" Daniel thundered, his voice carrying across the terminal. "What good is an image if it hides rot beneath the surface? This company was built to serve people, not humiliate them." The terminal fell silent, the weight of his words sinking deep. Amara's chest ached, her eyes burning. For so long, she had feared her father's distance, his role as a figure more than a parent. But now, standing in the heart of the storm, he wasn't just a CEO. He was a man who saw, who listened. Passengers began to applaud, at first a ripple, then a swell, echoing off the walls. Not polite claps this time, but a chorus of voices demanding change. Daniel raised his hand, silencing the crowd. His gaze returned to Richard and Langston. "You are both finished," he said, his tone final, unyielding, effective immediately. "Security will escort you out. This airline will not be a place where dignity is discarded. Not while I lead it." Richard's face crumpled with fury, but he said nothing. Langston, pale and stiff, nodded once before turning away. Security moved in, guiding them out under the watchful eyes of dozens of witnesses and recording phones. When the echo of their footsteps faded, Daniel turned back to the passengers. "You deserve better," he said, his voice steady, resonant. "From this moment forward, policies will change. Reports will not vanish. Voices will not be silenced, and respect will not be negotiable." The applause erupted again, louder than ever, rolling through the terminal like thunder. Amara stood frozen, overwhelmed by the swell of it. Her father turned to her, and for the first time in years, she saw not just the CEO, but the man who had raised her. "You did what I could not," he said quietly. "You saw what I could not see, and you had the courage to face it." Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them. "I couldn't stay silent. Not anymore." He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then you've reminded me why we began this work in the first place. To serve with dignity, to lead with humanity." Sophia and Grace stood nearby, tears in their eyes, pride in their posture. Dr. Moore bowed his head respectfully. Passengers clapped, cheered, filmed, immortalized the moment. For Amara, it was more than victory, it was justice. Later that evening, as the sun sank over Los Angeles, Amara sat by a window in the quiet of her hotel room. Her notebook lay open, blank pages waiting for what came next. She picked up her pen, her hand steady. Today, justice was not hidden in shadows. Today, truth walked into the light. But the fight is not finished. The skies must remain open for everyone, equally. This is only the beginning. She closed the notebook, her heart lighter. For the first time in weeks, sleep came easily. The world would wake tomorrow to headlines, to recordings, to change. And though turbulence lay ahead, Amara knew one truth. Justice had finally taken flight. Sometimes, stories end with applause, but this one leaves us with something deeper. What happened on that flight was more than a confrontation. It was a reminder that silence protects the wrong side, that respect is not optional, that discrimination, no matter how subtle, must be exposed. Amara's courage was not just her own. It became the courage of every passenger who raised their voice, of every worker who felt unseen, of every person who has ever been told to know their place. Her story reminds us that justice is possible, but only if we demand it. As the engines quieted and the skies opened, what truly took flight was dignity. And that's something no one can take away. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect, or if it stirred something inside, we invite you to keep this message alive. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that confront injustice and celebrate the power of human courage. Because the skies belong to all of us, and so does respect.